The shove came without warning, the kind of casual violence that tells you it isn't the first time it's been imagined, only the first time it's been done. My son-in-law's hand found my shoulder, and I hit the counter before I hit the floor, my hip screaming in a language it had only recently learned, back in March, when the hospital bed had been my whole world for 11 days. From the kitchen tile of his glass-walled house outside Portland, I looked up and I heard him say the word, useless. He didn't shout it. That was the worst part. He said it the way a man corrects a waiter. My daughter, Renee, was standing at the sink not 4 feet away, drying a wine glass that did not need drying, and she did not turn around. She let the water keep running. I want to tell you plainly, before anything else, that I am not a woman given to self-pity. I raised Renee alone from the time she was 6, after her father, my husband Daniel, was killed on a highway outside Spokane by a driver who never saw the median line. I ran the hardware store he'd built with his own hands for 18 years after that. I balanced the books at the kitchen table with a calculator that had a cracked corner, and I never once told my daughter that some months I ate crackers and mustard for dinner so she could have new shoes for the school year. She doesn't know that. She's never asked what it cost me. Children rarely do. So when I say that I sat on that floor and felt something in me go very quiet and very still, I don't mean I was broken. I mean I was finally, after 68 years, done being surprised. It had started small, the way these things always do. 3 months earlier, my doctor had told me flatly that I could not live alone through recovery, not with the pneumonia that had nearly taken me, not with lungs that still crackled when I climbed stairs. Renee had called that same evening, her voice pitched high with the particular urgency of a daughter who's already decided the answer and only needs you to agree with it. Come stay with us, Mom. Just until you're strong again. Craig would love to have you. Craig had never loved anything about having me. I understood that within the first week, the way you understand weather by the smell of the air before it turns. He was polite in the manner of men who consider politeness a transaction, a thing extended on credit and expected back with interest. He called me Barbara with a warmth that never once reached his eyes. He asked, the second week, if I might handle the laundry since I was resting anyway. By the 3rd week, resting had become a word he used only when he wanted something done and needed a way to ask that didn't sound like an order, though it always was one. I tried once to speak to my daughter about it. I found her folding towels in the laundry room, a task Craig had somehow decided was beneath him, but not beneath either of us. Renee, I said, this isn't what we agreed to. I came here to heal, not to keep house. She didn't stop folding. That familiar flinch moved across her face, the one she used to get as a girl when she'd broken something and hadn't yet decided whether to confess or hide it. Mom, please, she said. He's stressed at work. Just let it go. It's easier. Easier for whom? I wanted to ask. I didn't. I had already learned, by then, that there was no answer I could give that Renee wouldn't turn into evidence against herself. The pneumonia cleared. My strength came back in slow, stubborn increments, the way strength does after 70. And still, every time I mentioned Vermont, my house, my garden, the life waiting for me exactly as I'd left it, Craig found a reason it wasn't yet time. The roads aren't safe in winter, Barbara. You're better off here, where we can keep an eye on you. Keep an eye on me. As though I were livestock that had wandered from its pen. That afternoon, the one that ended with me on his kitchen floor, I had been making a pot roast, Daniel's recipe, the one with the bay leaf and the splash of vinegar he swore by. Craig came in from his office, still wearing the scowl he brought home from every phone call, and looked into the pot like it had personally offended him. What is this? He said. It's supposed to be pot roast, I told him. It's brown water, he said. It's inedible. You've ruined perfectly good meat. I said, evenly, that I had been cooking that recipe since before he was born, and that the meat was fine. That was when his hand found my shoulder. I did not cry out. I want that understood. I made a sound, once, when my back met the counter's edge, but it was surprise more than pain, and I swallowed it before it could become anything Craig might enjoy. Renee's water kept running. The faucet was the only voice in that kitchen willing to acknowledge what had happened. I pulled myself up using the counter, the way I'd learned to pull myself out of a hospital bed 11 weeks earlier, One deliberate motion at a time, no drama in it, no performance. I walked past my daughter.
She did not look at me.
I went to the guest room, and I locked the door, and I sat on the edge of that narrow bed with my hands folded in my lap, like a woman waiting for a bus that was very late. That was when I remembered the envelope. It had come 3 days earlier, tucked in among the catalogs and the coupon flyers, addressed in a formal, embossed hand to Mrs. Barbara Holt. I had slipped it into the drawer of the nightstand without opening it, assuming it was one of those insurance solicitations that follow a woman my age like gulls follow a fishing boat. I hadn't thought of it since. Now, sitting on that narrow guest bed with my shoulder throbbing and my daughter's silence still ringing louder than Craig's voice had, I opened the drawer and took it out. The return address read Cascade Trust and Fiduciary, Spokane, Washington. Inside was a letter, thick cream paper, from a man who signed himself Mr. Dale Whitfield, Senior Trust Officer. He wrote that his firm had spent the better part of 2 years attempting to locate the surviving beneficiary of an estate, and that a forwarding trace through property tax records had finally led him to me. He apologized for the delay. He said the matter concerned my late husband, Daniel Holt. I read that sentence 3 times before it settled into me. Daniel had been gone 22 years. I knew, the way you know the walls of your own house in the dark, exactly what he had left behind, the store, sold years ago to pay down debt I had known he'd carried, and a small life insurance payout that had covered Renee's first 2 years of college before running dry. There had been nothing else. I had made peace with that a long time ago. But the letter continued, in that dry, careful legal language, to describe something else entirely. In the years before the accident, Daniel had quietly invested a portion of the store's profits, money I had never seen, never known existed, into a handful of small technology companies, one of which had been bought out in the early 2000s, and again a decade later, until what began as a few $1,000s had grown, compounding untouched in a trust structure Daniel had set up and never told me about, into just over $6 million. There was a second envelope inside the first, smaller, and in it a letter in Daniel's own hand, the handwriting so familiar my chest ached before I'd read a single word. Asterisk Barbara, if you're reading this, it means the trust has finally found you, and that means I'm gone, and that you've had to build a life without me for longer than either of us would have wanted. I didn't tell you about this money, because I wanted you to know you could stand on your own. I watched you do it every day we were married, and I never doubted you could keep doing it. But I also knew that someday you might need more than your own 2 feet under you. If that day has come, use this. Use it to be safe. Use it to never again have to accept less than you deserve from anyone.
D***.
I sat with that letter a long time. The house beyond my locked door was quiet. I could hear, faintly, the clink of Craig fixing himself a drink, the murmur of the television Renee had turned on, likely as much to fill the silence as to watch anything. I thought about the word useless, how easily it had left his mouth, how my daughter had let the water run instead of turning around. The final page of the letter from Mr. Whitfield noted one more detail, almost as an afterthought, the way the most important things in a legal document often are. The trust held its assets through a holding company, Alder Ridge Holdings, which in turn owned 3 residential properties in the Pacific Northwest. One of them, I read the address twice to be sure, was the very house I was sitting in. Craig had told Renee, when they bought it 4 years ago, that he'd gotten a remarkable deal from a private seller who wanted to avoid the open market. He had never mentioned who that seller was, because he had never known. Daniel had bought it as an investment 15 years earlier, long before Craig or Renee had any claim to it, and it had simply been sitting in the trust ever since, collecting rent from a management company Craig had assumed was faceless and permanent. It was not faceless. It was mine. I did not cry, though I came close. I did not feel triumphant. Not yet. That would come later, and it would surprise me with how little it resembled anger. What I felt, sitting on that bed with my shoulder bruising and my husband's handwriting still warm in my hands, was something closer to arrival. Like a door I hadn't known was locked had simply swung open. I folded both letters carefully and put them back in my apron pocket, where they had been resting, unopened and unremarked upon, through the entire ugly scene in the kitchen. I thought about that for a moment, how close I had come to being shoved to the floor by a man who did not know he was pushing around his own landlord. I did not sleep much that night. I lay in the dark of the guest room and listened to the house settle, and I made a list in my mind, the way I used to make lists for the store, methodical and unhurried. In the morning, I would not argue. I would not raise my voice. I had spent 40 years running a hardware store, and I knew, better than most, that you do not win a negotiation by shouting. You win it by knowing exactly what you own, and exactly what the other person doesn't know you own. By the time the light came up gray through the blinds, I had stopped being a guest in that house. I had started being its landlord. I rose before either of them, dressed in the one good blazer I'd packed, navy, tailored, the kind of thing I hadn't worn since I'd stopped needing to look presentable for bank meetings at the store. I made coffee. I did not make breakfast. When Craig shuffled in, bleary from whatever he'd been drinking the night before, he grunted something that might have been a good morning and didn't look at me twice. Renee came in a few minutes later, and unlike him, she did look, her eyes flicking to my shoulder, to the faint shadow already blooming there beneath my sleeve, and then away just as fast, the way you look away from the sun. "Mom," she said quietly, "are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine," I told her, and I meant it in a way she couldn't yet understand. "I have some errands this morning. I won't be back for dinner." Craig's head came up from his phone. "Errands," he said, like the word itself was suspicious. "What errands?" "Private ones," I said, and I picked up my purse and walked out the door before either of them could manufacture an objection. I did not call a cab. I used the app on my phone, the one my granddaughter had shown me how to use 2 Christmases ago, and I had it take me downtown, to the glass tower where Cascade Trust and Fiduciary kept its offices on the 9th floor. Mr. Whitfield turned out to be an older man with kind, tired eyes and a handshake that told me he'd been waiting a long time to give someone good news. He walked me through the portfolio for nearly 2 hours, the accounts, the holdings, the strange, quiet miracle of what Daniel had built in secret out of a hardware store's spare change. I signed where he told me to sign. I was handed a debit card, a checkbook, and a document naming me sole controlling trustee of Alder Ridge Holdings. "Is there a property manager for the residential holdings?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Cedar and Vine Property Management handles leasing and maintenance on all 3. "I would like a meeting with them this afternoon," I said. "And I'd like the transfer of authority process today, not next week."
Today.
He didn't blink. He simply nodded and picked up the phone. I did not go back to the house that night or the next. I checked into a hotel downtown, a good one, the kind with a doorman who calls you ma'am and means it. I bought myself 2 new dresses and a coat that actually fit the woman I was now, rather than the woman I'd been shrinking myself into for 3 months in someone else's guest room. I had my hair done. I looked in the mirror of that hotel bathroom and saw, for the first time in longer than I could say, my own mother's spine looking back at me, the woman who'd raised 4 children through the Depression and never once apologized for taking up space. The call to Cedar and Vine was brief. I introduced myself as the new controlling owner of Alder Ridge Holdings. I asked about the lease on the property at Craig and Renee's address. The man on the line hesitated when I told him I wanted a new lease drawn up at full current market rate, effective the 1st of the following month. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "that would be nearly triple what they're currently paying. They've been on a legacy rate the previous owner never adjusted." "I'm aware," I said. "Send the notice tomorrow morning. And going forward, I'd like your standard late payment policy enforced to the letter."
No exceptions.
That evening, sitting in my hotel room with a room service dinner and a glass of wine I hadn't had to cook or serve to anyone, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 months, maybe longer. I felt like myself. The call came the next evening, exactly as I expected it would. Renee's voice was high and fractured, the particular pitch of a woman trying to sound calm and failing. "Mom, where are you? We've been so worried." And, "Mom, something insane happened. The company that owns the house, they sent us a new lease. It's almost triple what we pay now. Craig says it's illegal. He's calling a lawyer. I don't, Mom. Are you even listening?" "I'm listening," I said. "What are we supposed to do?" "We can't afford that. We'll have to move. We'll lose, Mom. Please, this isn't funny. Why aren't you saying anything?" I let the silence sit a moment before I answered. "Renee," I said, Do you remember 2 nights ago when your husband put his hands on your mother and shoved her to the kitchen floor? Do you remember standing at that sink with the water running and not turning around? The silence on her end was total. Coldness, I told her, is a lesson I learned in your kitchen. I have a dinner reservation. I'll speak to you soon. I hung up before she could answer. The 2 weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like the eye of something larger still moving. I did not go back to that house. I moved from the hotel into a furnished apartment I leased for myself, in a part of town with tree-lined streets and a bakery on the corner that knew my order by the second visit. I retained a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Cho, who specialized in trust litigation mostly, she told me, to have the paperwork airtight in case Craig made good on his threat of a lawsuit. He never did. Men like Craig are quick with threats and slow with follow-through, especially once a real attorney's letterhead enters the conversation. On the 1st of the month, no rent arrived for the house. On the 3rd, cedar and vine sent, at my direction, a formal notice to pay or vacate. Renee called me that evening, and this time there was no anger in her voice at all, only a kind of hollowed-out exhaustion I recognized from my own worst years. "He's not handling it well, Mom," she said. "He's been drinking every night. He threw his laptop at the wall yesterday. He keeps asking how this could happen, who could possibly have bought that lease out from under him. He thinks," she stopped. "He thinks what?" I asked.
He thinks it might be you, she said.
And I told him that was ridiculous. I told him you don't have that kind of money. You never have. I didn't correct her. Not yet. "Is he hurting you, Renee?" I asked instead, and my voice must have carried something in it because she didn't answer right away. "He grabbed my wrist last night," she finally said very quietly. "He didn't hit me. He's scared, Mom, and when he's scared he gets ugly, and I don't know what to do. I can't pay this. He says it's my fault for not managing the house better, he says." "Renee," I said, cutting through it the way I used to cut through her panic when she was small and had broken something she was sure I'd never forgive.
"Listen to me.
I am sending a car. It will be outside your building in 15 minutes. Pack one bag. Take your wallet, your passport, anything you cannot replace. Leave your phone charger. Leave the rest. Just walk out the front door and get in the car." "But Craig, he'll be home any minute," she said, her voice climbing again. "Then you'd better hurry," I told her, and I hung up and called the car service myself. I waited in the lobby of my building with my coat still on, watching the door, and for 18 minutes I let myself imagine that she wouldn't come, that whatever still bound her to that house would win out over whatever thin cord still bound her to me. Then the black sedan pulled up outside, and the door opened, and my daughter stumbled out onto the sidewalk carrying nothing but her purse, her face wrecked in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, and the world had first shown her its teeth. I met her at the door, and held her while she cried, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere much older than the last 2 weeks, and I did not say "I told you so" because I never had, not once, and there was no satisfaction in being right about a thing that had cost my daughter this much. That night, at my kitchen table, I told her everything. The letter, Daniel's handwriting, the trust, the $6 million he'd built in silence out of a hardware store's spare profits, the house she'd been living in that had been mine, ours, long before Craig ever signed a lease on it. I watched her face move through disbelief, then horror, then something that looked almost like grief for the version of her marriage she'd been telling herself was real. "The rent increase," she said finally, barely a whisper. "The eviction notice. That was all you." "Yes," I said. "He pushed you," she said, "and I let him." I just stood there. "I know," I said. "I needed you to see it, Renee. Not hear about it from me. See it yourself, plainly, with nothing left to explain it away. I needed you to see what he becomes when the money is threatened. That's when a person shows you who they really are. Not when things are easy. When something they think belongs to them gets taken back." She didn't go back to him. Not that week, not the month after. Craig moved out of the house within the year. He couldn't carry the new rent alone, and pride kept him from asking his estranged wife's mother for a break he had no right to expect. I sold the property eventually, to a young family who painted the kitchen a warm yellow and sent me a photograph of it, unprompted, the following spring. I never told them why I smiled at that photo longer than a stranger's kitchen should warrant. Renee and I are still rebuilding what 22 years of my silence and 3 months of his cruelty nearly cost us. It isn't finished. Some days it doesn't feel like it ever will be. But she calls me now most Sundays, just to talk, and last week she said something I've turned over in my mind ever since. I used to think being strong meant staying quiet and keeping the peace, she told me. I watched you do that my whole life. I didn't understand until that kitchen floor that the woman who raised me was never quiet because she was weak. She was just waiting for the moment it would matter. I don't know if that's entirely true. I know only this. I spent 40 years being underestimated by people who mistook my patience for permission. I am done being mistaken for that.